The human flagship Indomitable was a fortress in space. Ambassador Thelnon walked through its corridors with a mixture of awe and unease. Everything about the ship spoke of function over form. The walls were bare metal, the lighting was harsh and practical, and crew members moved with military precision. A human ensign, young with cybernetic enhancements visible along her neck, guided him to the command center. "Admiral Liu is expecting you, sir. She's reviewing the battle data from our latest engagement." The command center was surprisingly small compared to Council vessels. Every station was occupied by a crew member interfacing directly with their systems through neural links. Holographic displays showed tactical information, fleet positions, and damage reports. At the center of it all stood Admiral Liu. She was in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her left arm was entirely cybernetic, and her eyes had the slight glow that indicated optical enhancements. She looked up as Thelnon entered and dismissed the displays with a gesture. "Ambassador," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many battles. "I assume you're here to discuss terms." "I am," Thelnon replied. "The Council is grateful for your intervention at Helios." "Your tactics were impressive. They were necessary," Liu corrected, "and they'll only work a few more times before the Kresh fully adapt. We need to talk about what happens next, both in this war and after." She gestured to a conference room off the main command center. Inside, several other human officers waited, along with Dr. Kessela and Commander Vrix from the Council delegation. "Let's start with the immediate situation," Liu began, pulling up a star map. "The Kresh are regrouping here in the Sigma sector. Our intelligence suggests they're building more ships, incorporating defenses against the tactics we used at Helios. They'll be back within 3 months, stronger than before." "How do you know this?" Commander Vrix asked. A human intelligence officer answered. "We've been tracking the Kresh since they first emerged from the galactic core. We've infiltrated their communication networks, analyzed their construction patterns, and run thousands of combat simulations. We know how they think, how they adapt, and most importantly, how to stay ahead of them." "You've been watching them this whole time?" Thelnon felt a flash of anger. "You knew they were coming and you didn't warn us?" "Would you have listened?" Liu asked bluntly. "The Council made it clear 300 years ago that they didn't want human interference. We respected that. We watched, we prepared, and we waited to see if you would ask for help. You did. Here we are." The truth of it stung, but Thelnon couldn't argue. She was right, Liu continued. "The Kresh are a problem, but they're not invincible. They rely on networked intelligence and adaptive systems. That's both their strength and their weakness. They learn from every engagement, but they do it systematically. They follow patterns. Humans don't." She pulled up footage from the Battle of Helios. "Every species in the Council fights logically. You analyze the enemy, develop optimal strategies, and execute them efficiently. The Kresh do the same thing, just better. They outcompute you. And humans?" Dr. Kessela asked. "We're chaos," Liu said with a slight smile. "We developed on a world that tried to kill us in every possible way. We learned to adapt faster than our environment could change. We learned to be creative, illogical, unpredictable. When we see a problem, we don't just find the optimal solution. We find 20 different solutions and use them all at once." She zoomed in on a section of the battle. "Look here. We used kinetic weapons, then electronic warfare, then computer viruses, then physical ramming attacks. Each tactic alone would have failed once the Kresh adapted. But by constantly switching between completely different approaches, we kept them off balance. This is how humanity fights," Commander Vrix said quietly. "This is what the old stories described." "Yes," Liu agreed. "And it's how we'll win this war. But we need the Council's cooperation. Your technology is more advanced than ours in many areas. Your shields are better. Your sensors are more precise. Your medical technology is decades ahead of what we have. If we combine Council technology with human tactics, we can push the Kresh back." "What are you proposing?" Thelnon asked. Liu's expression became serious. "Full military cooperation. Joint training exercises. Technology sharing. Council engineers working with human strategists. We'll teach you to fight like we do. Messy, creative, and effective. In return, you give us access to your advanced technology. The Council will have concerns about sharing classified technology. Then they can watch more worlds burn," Liu said flatly. "I'm not interested in politics, Ambassador. I'm interested in winning. The Kresh won't stop until every organic world is harvested. That includes Earth. We're all in this together, whether the Council likes it or not." Thelnon looked at the star map, at the red markers showing crash positions and the yellow ones showing threatened worlds. Billions of lives hung in the balance. What happens after? He asked. After we defeat the crash, what then? Then we talk about reforming the council, Liu said. Humanity won't go back to being your convenient soldiers. We won't follow rules that don't make sense. We won't fight honorably when the enemy doesn't. And we won't accept being treated as second-class members of galactic civilization. She leaned forward. 300 years ago, the council pushed us away because we made you uncomfortable. We won battles in ways you didn't approve of. We formed bonds with other species too easily. We questioned your authority. All the things that made us effective also made us dangerous to your neat, orderly view of how the galaxy should work. Times have changed, Thelnon said. Have they? Liu challenged. Or did you only come looking for us because you ran out of options? Be honest, Ambassador. If you could have defeated the crash without us, would you have come to Earth? The silence in the room was her answer. Liu sat back. That's what I thought. But here's the thing. Humans don't hold grudges when lives are at stake. You treated us badly, yes. You pushed us away, yes. But innocent beings are dying, and we won't let that continue just to make a point. We'll help you win this war. Then we'll have a conversation about building a better galaxy. Over the next week, the human fleet and council forces began coordinating. Human officers held briefings on unconventional warfare. Council engineers marveled at human weapons that prioritized function over elegance. Mixed species crews trained together, learning to combine their strengths. The change was visible everywhere. Council soldiers learned to set ambushes and use terrain to their advantage. Human ships received upgrades to their shield systems. Tactical doctrine that had been standard for centuries was rewritten to include human concepts like acceptable chaos and creative violence. 3 months later, when the Kresh returned to the Helios cluster, they found something different. The defensive fleet wasn't arranged in neat formations. Ships moved in seemingly random patterns. When the Kresh advanced, they triggered traps set by humans and council forces working together. Energy weapons from council ships targeted specific vulnerabilities identified by human intelligence. Human boarding parties transported by council teleportation technology struck at critical systems. The battle lasted 12 hours. The Kresh adapted as they always did, but this time the defenders adapted faster. Every time the Kresh shifted tactics, the combined fleet was ready with a new response. The Kresh retreated again, but this time they had lost 2/3 of their forces. Word spread across the galaxy. Humanity had returned and everything was changing. Young cadets from a dozen species signed up to train at new joint military academies, where human instructors taught alongside council officers. The phrase, "never give up, never surrender," became a common saying in multiple languages. On Earth, Director Chen stood in the old council embassy building, now being restored after centuries of neglect. She looked at the same room where her great-great-grandmother had delivered humanity's final message 300 years ago. "We're back," she said quietly to the empty room. "And this time, we're not leaving." The war against the Kresh would continue for years. There would be setbacks and losses, victories and defeats. But the tide had turned. The legends had become real, and they had brought something the galaxy had been missing. The stubborn, crazy, unpredictable determination that defined humanity. Across 1,000 worlds, beings who had never seen a human looked up at the stars with new hope. The stories were true. The humans had returned to the battlefield, and they were teaching the galaxy a new way to fight, not with perfect logic or overwhelming power, but with creativity, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to give up. The future was uncertain. The path ahead was difficult. But for the first time since the Kresh emerged, victory seemed possible, because humanity had returned and they had brought their chaos with them. The Helios cluster was dying. 3 stars and 15 inhabited worlds stood as the last major defensive position between the Kresh and the populated core of Council space. Admiral Krenoth of the combined Council fleet watched the tactical display with growing despair. "Enemy fleet composition?" he asked his tactical officer. 347 capital ships, over 2,000 support vessels, came the reply. "They outnumber us 3-1, and their shields are already adapting to our weapons fire." Krenoth had seen this pattern before. The Kresh would advance in perfect geometric formations, their shields shimmering with stolen stellar energy. Council ships would fire everything they had and it would barely matter. The Kresh ships would analyze each weapon type, adjust their defenses, and keep coming. It was like fighting an opponent who learned from every mistake you made while making none themselves. How long until they reach firing range? Krenath asked. 17 minutes. 17 minutes until another battle they would lose. Krenath looked at the display showing the planets below. Helios III held 2 billion Valorian citizens. Helios Prime had a mixed population of 5 billion from a dozen different species. They were evacuating as many as they could, but there wasn't enough time. There was never enough time. Sir, new contacts emerging from slip space. The sensor operator shouted. Multiple ships, unknown configuration. There, by the stars, there are hundreds of them. The tactical display updated, showing a fleet materializing between the Council forces and the Kresh. These were not Council ships. They were angular and brutal-looking, covered in armor plating and weapon emplacements. Each one was marked with the same symbol, a blue and green sphere wrapped in olive branches. The ancient symbol of Earth, the humans, Krenath breathed. They actually came. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice was female, calm, and professional. Council forces, this is Admiral Liu of the Terran Third Fleet. We're here to help. Recommend you fall back to defensive position Beta. We'll handle the welcoming committee. Admiral Liu, this is Admiral Krenath. Be advised the Kresh have adaptive shielding. They'll adjust to whatever weapons you use within minutes. Then we'll just have to be creative. There was something in her tone, something that reminded Krenath of the old stories about human tactics. All Council ships fall back now. Things are about to get messy. The human fleet didn't wait for acknowledgement. They simply charged forward, accelerating at speeds that made their inertial dampeners must be incredibly advanced. The Kresh fleet adjusted their formation, preparing to meet this new threat with the same cold efficiency they had shown in every previous engagement. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for generations. The human ships opened fire, but not with the energy weapons the Council used. Massive railguns launched projectiles at relativistic speeds. These weren't sophisticated weapons. They were chunks of metal accelerated to incredible velocities using magnetic coils. Simple, brutal, effective. The Kresh shields, optimized for energy weapons, struggled to stop solid matter moving at that speed. Several Kresh ships took damage before their shields adapted. But by then, the human ships had switched tactics. Missiles launched from human vessels, but these weren't normal missiles. They were electronic warfare packages that detonated near Kresh ships, flooding their systems with false data and overloading their sensors. While the Kresh were blinded, human fighters swarmed forward. These fighters were small and fast, moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully coordinated chaos. They launched kinetic kill vehicles, electromagnetic pulse bombs, and even stranger weapons that caused Kresh ships to suddenly power down or turn against each other. Computer viruses, Commander Vrick said with awe from where he watched aboard a Council ship. The humans are hacking them. They're turning the Kresh's own networked systems into a weakness. The Kresh adapted quickly, as they always did. Their shields adjusted to block kinetic weapons. Their systems purged the computer viruses. Their point defenses began targeting human fighters more effectively. But the humans had already moved on to something else. 3 human ships, larger than the others, moved directly into the Kresh formation. They ignored the weapons fire hitting their shields, drove straight at Kresh dreadnoughts, and at the last moment, ejected what looked like enormous bombs before veering away. The bombs detonated with pure kinetic force, not explosions but directed energy that pushed outward in a single direction. The effect was like a hammer hitting a nail. Kresh ships were driven backward into each other, their formations breaking apart. They're using the Kresh's own geometric precision against them, Admiral Krenath realized. By disrupting their formation, they're forcing them into suboptimal positions. The battle became a chaotic swirl of ships and weapons fire. The Kresh tried to restore order, to fall back into their efficient formations. But human ships were everywhere, constantly moving, constantly attacking from unexpected angles. Just when the Kresh adapted to one tactic, the humans would switch to something completely different. Then the ground battle began. The Kresh, unable to break through the space defenses, tried their backup plan. Landing craft launched from their ships, heading for Helios III. They would harvest the planet from the ground up if they couldn't control space. Human drop pods fell like rain. They were crude things, just armored shells with basic guidance systems and retro rockets. But they got the job done. The pods slammed into the ground across every major population center, and human soldiers emerged. The Marines wore powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. They carried weapons that ranged from sophisticated plasma rifles to simple but effective chemical explosive launchers. They didn't form neat defensive lines like Council forces did. Instead, they scattered across the urban terrain using buildings and rubble for cover. The Kresh ground forces were efficient killers. Their combat robots moved in coordinated groups, using overwhelming firepower to clear sectors systematically. They had worked against every Council species so far. They had never fought humans before. A Kresh assault group moved down a main street in one of Helios III's cities, their sensors scanning for targets. They detected heat signatures in a building ahead and directed fire at it. The building collapsed, but the heat signatures were gone. They had been decoys. The real attack came from behind and above. Human soldiers had climbed through the sewer system and up through adjacent buildings. They dropped onto the Kresh robots from overhead, using magnetic charges to disable them. When the Kresh tried to call for support, they found their communications jammed. "This is Sergeant Ramirez," a human voice broadcast on all channels. "You want this city? Come and take it." The Kresh came. They sent more troops, more robots, more resources. The humans met them at every turn. They set traps using the Kresh's own logical thinking against them. They feigned retreats to draw Kresh forces into kill zones. They used civilians as motivation, fighting harder every time the Kresh threatened evacuation centers. In one memorable incident, a squad of human Marines found themselves defending a hospital full of wounded Valorian children. They were outnumbered 10-1. The squad leader, a corporal named Chen, sent a message to her superiors. "We're not leaving. Send reinforcements or send body bags." Reinforcements arrived. The hospital held. The battle for Helios lasted 18 hours. It was brutal and bloody and nothing like the clean, efficient warfare the Council practiced. It was human warfare, messy, unpredictable, and ultimately effective. When the Kresh finally retreated, they left behind the wreckage of half their fleet. It was their first major defeat since emerging from the Galactic core. Admiral Krenoth stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the damage assessments roll in. The human fleet had taken losses too. Their shields weren't as advanced as Council technology, and they had paid a price for their aggressive tactics. But they had won. They had done something the Council had failed to do 15 times. "Admiral Liu, this is Admiral Krenoth. On behalf of the Galactic Council, thank you. You saved billions of lives today." Liu's response was tired but satisfied. "That's what we do, Admiral. We save people. Now let's talk about how we're going to finish what we started. The Kresh will adapt to what we did here. Next time will be harder. We need to share intelligence, combine our technologies, and coordinate our strategies. Are you ready for that?" Krenoth looked at his tactical officers, saw the respect in their eyes as they studied the human tactics. He thought about 300 years of human isolation, of the time they had spent preparing while the rest of the galaxy grew complacent. "Yes," he said. "We're ready. Teach us." Across the Helios cluster, word of the battle spread. The legends had returned, and they were every bit as formidable as the old stories claimed. Maybe more so. The war was far from over. But for the first time since the Kresh appeared, the Council forces felt something they had almost forgotten: hope. The ship was called the Herald of Accord, and it was the fastest vessel the Council could spare. Captain Morath stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak past as they jumped through slipspace. Behind him, 7 diplomatic representatives from different species tried not to look nervous. Ambassador Thelnon checked their navigation for the 10th time that hour. "We're 3 days from the edge of what used to be human territory," he said. "Once we cross that boundary, we're in unknown space." "Unknown and potentially hostile," Commander Vrix added. The Korath military officer had been assigned to the mission as security, though everyone knew that if humanity wanted them dead, one soldier wouldn't make much difference. "We should be prepared for anything." Dr. Kessela was reviewing her data files again, memorizing every detail about human behavior and culture. She would be the one to make first contact, to explain why they had come. The responsibility weighed heavily on her. 2 days later, they reached the boundary. The herald slowed as it approached a line marked on their star charts. Beyond this point, the maps went blank. 300 years ago, humanity had claimed this region of space and told everyone else to stay out. Sensors picking up something, the navigator announced. Multiple objects ahead. They're active. They're moving. On the main display, dozens of small objects appeared. They were shaped like cylinders, floating in space at regular intervals. As the herald approached, they began broadcasting a message. The voice spoke in Galactic Standard, but with a human accent that sounded strange after 3 centuries. Warning, you are approaching quarantined space. This region is under Terran jurisdiction. Turn back immediately. Trespassers will be met with lethal force. This is your only warning. The message repeated in dozens of other languages, including some that were no longer spoken anywhere in known space. Thelnon stood up. Send a response. Standard diplomatic codes. Tell them we come in peace and request permission to speak with human authorities. They waited. Minutes passed with no response. The warning beacons continued their broadcast, uncaring and automatic. Should we turn back? Captain Morath asked. Thelnon shook his head. We've come too far. Continue forward, but slowly. Be ready to retreat if they attack. The herald moved past the beacons. Nothing happened. They continued deeper into human space, following the old coordinates toward the Sol system. Every sensor was active, scanning for any sign of ships or stations. What they found surprised them. Captain, I'm detecting energy signatures, the sensor operator said. Lots of them. There's a star system ahead and it's full of activity. The display showed a solar system with 8 planets, but the space around those planets was filled with artificial structures. Massive orbital stations circled gas giants. Solar collectors formed rings around the inner star. Transport ships moved between worlds in organized patterns. They're not gone, Dr. Kessela whispered. They've been here the whole time. As they approached Earth, the 3rd planet from the sun, the scope of human development became clear. The planet was covered in cities and infrastructure, but most impressive were the orbital installations. Hundreds of satellites and stations formed layers around the world. Defensive platforms tracked the herald with obvious weapon systems. I'm counting 47 defensive installations capable of destroying us, Commander Vrix reported. His voice held respect despite the threat. And those are just the ones we can detect. There are probably more. A new transmission came through, this one clearly meant for them specifically. Unidentified vessel, this is Terran Defense Command. Cut your engines and hold position. You've entered restricted space without authorization. State your identity and purpose immediately. Thelnon activated the communication system. This is Ambassador Thelnon of the Galactic Council, aboard the diplomatic vessel Herald of Accord. We come seeking audience with the Terran government. We have an urgent matter to discuss. There was a long pause. Thelnon could imagine the discussions happening on the other end. The humans had to be surprised. 3 centuries of silence, and now the council was at their doorstep. Finally, a response came. Stand by, Ambassador. We're verifying your identity and intent. Hours passed. The Herald remained in position, engines cold while human ships moved around them. These vessels were nothing like the crude warships from the old recordings. They were sleek and efficient, incorporating technologies the Council didn't recognize. Whatever humans had been doing for 300 years, they had not been idle. A new voice finally spoke, this one carrying more authority. Ambassador Thelnon, I am Director Chen of Terran Foreign Affairs. Yes, related to the Admiral. My great-great-grandmother, in fact. I've reviewed your credentials. You're a long way from Council space. What brings you here after all this time? Thelnon chose his words carefully. Director Chen, the galaxy faces an existential threat. A force called the Kresh Dominion has emerged from the galactic core. They're a machine intelligence that consumes organic worlds. We've lost 15 battles against them. Billions have died. We've come to ask for humanity's help. Another pause. And why would we help? The Council made it very clear 300 years ago that humanity wasn't welcome in galactic affairs. Because the Kresh won't stop at Council borders, Dr. Kessela interjected. They'll consume every organic world they find. Eventually they'll reach Earth. We're asking you to help us stop them before that happens. Send us all your tactical data, Director Chen ordered. Everything you have on the Kresh. Fleet compositions, battle records, technological specifications. We'll review it and make a decision. How long will that take? Thelnon asked. As long as it needs to. You're free to remain in orbit. We'll provide you with supplies if needed. But don't leave your ship and don't send any probes or scans toward Earth. Those defensive platforms aren't just for show. The transmission ended. The diplomatic team looked at each other with mixed expressions of hope and anxiety. 3 days passed. The humans sent food and water, which was a good sign. They also sent technical journals and news reports, letting the council representatives catch up on 3 centuries of human development. The reading was both fascinating and intimidating. Humanity had not stagnated in isolation. They had thrived. Their technology had advanced in unexpected directions. They had explored and colonized dozens of systems. Their population had grown to over 200 billion, spread across multiple worlds and habitats. But most interesting were the philosophical developments. Humans had spent 3 centuries analyzing what went wrong during their first contact with galactic civilization. They had studied every alien species they had encountered, learning from both successes and failures. They had prepared not just militarily but socially and culturally. On the 3rd day, Director Chen contacted them again. "We've reviewed your data. The Kresh are a serious threat, more dangerous than you probably realize. Their technology base suggests they've been developing for thousands of years, possibly longer. If left unchecked, they will eventually reach Sol. Does that mean you'll help?" Thelnon asked. "It means we're willing to discuss terms," Chen replied. "But understand this, Ambassador. If humanity returns to the galactic stage, we're not going to be your convenient soldiers anymore. We'll help you fight the Kresh, but things will be different this time. We'll fight our way, using our strategies and methods. The Council won't dictate how we conduct warfare, and when this is over, we're going to have a serious conversation about reforming how galactic civilization operates. Are those terms acceptable?" Thelnon looked at the other representatives. He saw reluctance on some faces, but also resignation. They had no choice. It was accept human terms or face extinction. "Those terms are acceptable," he said. "When can we expect your forces?" "We'll deploy the 3rd Fleet within the week. Admiral Liu will be in command. She's fought against the Kresh in simulations for the past year. We've been tracking them since they emerged, Ambassador. We knew they were coming. We just weren't sure if we should intervene." Chen's tone became harder. "Send us coordinates for your primary defensive position. We'll meet you there. And Ambassador, try not to be too shocked when you see what we've brought. War has changed a lot in 300 years. The transmission ended. The Herald was cleared to depart and given a course that would take them back to Council space quickly. As they jumped back into slip space, Thelnon felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had succeeded in their mission. Humanity would fight alongside them against the Kresh, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just unleashed something they didn't fully understand. The humans who had left 3 centuries ago were considered dangerous. What had they become with 300 years to prepare? The galaxy was about to find out. Dr. Kasala had worked in the Council archives for 20 years, but she had never been granted access to the restricted section before. The massive doors required 3 different security clearances and a direct order from the Council itself. Now those doors stood open and she walked into a room that held 3 centuries of forgotten secrets. "Start with military records," her assistant Paran suggested. He was young, barely out of academy, and excited to be part of something important. "We need to know how humans fought." Kessela nodded and activated the search system. Thousands of files appeared in the holographic display, each one tagged with various classification levels. She filtered for anything related to humanity and combat effectiveness. The results made her pause. "That can't be right," she muttered. "What is it?" Paran moved closer to look. According to these records, humans participated in galactic affairs for only 70 years. In that time, they were involved in 14 major military conflicts. She pulled up a summary chart. They won 11 outright. The other 3 ended in stalemate or political settlement. They never lost a single war. Paran's ears flattened against his head, a sign of confusion in his species. How is that possible? The records say humans were technologically inferior to most Council species. Kessela opened the first combat report. It was from a conflict called the Border War, 40 years before humanity's withdrawal. A coalition of 3 species had been fighting over mineral rights in a disputed sector. The violence had been escalating for months when human peacekeepers arrived. The report was written by a Korath commander named Thresh. His words were clinical at first, describing fleet positions and tactical formations. Then the tone changed. "The humans do not fight like any species I have encountered," Commander Thresh wrote. "They refuse to engage our superior numbers in open space. Instead, they seeded the asteroid field with mines, disrupted our communications with electronic warfare, and launched hit-and-run attacks at random intervals. We could not predict their movements. Every time we adapted to their tactics, they changed approaches entirely. After 3 weeks, my forces were exhausted and demoralized. The humans had suffered minimal casualties. I requested a ceasefire. Kasala moved to the next file. This one was from the Valorian swarm, describing a different conflict. A Valorian hive had been attacked by pirates, and human ships responded to their distress call. The pirates had taken our hatchlings hostage, the Valorian Queen's report stated. They demanded payment and safe passage. Standard protocol would be to negotiate and track them later. The humans had a different idea. They said 3 words: "No one left behind." Then they attacked. The report described how human marines had boarded the pirate vessel through an airlock that was supposedly sealed. They had cut through it with industrial tools. The boarding action lasted 20 minutes. All the hostages were recovered alive. All the pirates were dead. The human commander apologized for the violence, the Queen wrote. She said she had children of her own and could not tolerate anyone who would harm the young. From that day forward, the Valorian swarm considered humanity our allies. We mourned when they left. File after file told similar stories. Humans were creative, unpredictable, and absolutely refused to give up. They treated war like a puzzle to be solved rather than a ritual to be followed. When their weapons were outmatched, they built new ones. When their tactics failed, they invented different approaches. And strangest of all, they formed emotional bonds with other species easily and quickly. "Look at this one," Perron said, highlighting a psychological evaluation report. "It's from a council therapist who worked with mixed species military units." Kessela read the report with growing fascination. The therapist, a member of the eternal species, had been assigned to counsel soldiers suffering from combat stress. He had noticed something unusual about units that included humans. Human soldiers engage in what they call pack bonding, the therapist wrote. This is a behavior apparently evolved from their relationship with domesticated animals on their homeworld. They form deep emotional connections not just with their own species, but with any being they spend significant time with. I observed a human medic risk her life to save a wounded Korath soldier, despite the fact that their species had been enemies in a previous conflict. When I asked her why, she said, "He's my friend." They had known each other for only 2 weeks. The report continued with more examples. Humans adopting orphaned alien children. Human engineers staying behind to help repair damaged ships from other species. Human commanders refusing promotion so they could stay with their mixed species teams. It painted a picture of a species that was both fierce in combat and deeply loyal to those they considered friends. But not everything in the archives was positive. Kessela found several files that explained why humanity had been pushed away. A military tribunal report detailed an incident where human forces had been accused of excessive violence. They had been fighting against a species called the Ravagers, who were known for taking prisoners and slowly killing them for entertainment. When humans discovered this practice, they stopped taking Ravager prisoners themselves. Every Ravager soldier they captured was given a quick trial and then executed. "This is barbaric," the tribunal judge had written. "Civilized species do not engage in summary execution." The humans argued that the Ravagers' own actions justify this response. This council disagrees. Humanity must follow the same rules of war as everyone else. The human representative at the tribunal had responded simply, "Then change your rules, or find someone else to do your dirty work." More incidents followed. Humans using banned weapons when they felt the situation required it. Human ships ignoring orders from Council Command when they disagreed with the strategy. Human diplomats being blunt to the point of rudeness in political negotiations. The pattern was clear. Humanity didn't fit into the neat, orderly structure the Council preferred. The final file Kessela opened was the most revealing. It was a collection of personal logs from various Council members, all talking about humanity during their final years in galactic affairs. "We made a mistake," one ambassador wrote. "We treated humans like useful tools. When we needed warriors, we called them. When we needed someone to take risks we wouldn't take ourselves, we called them. But we never treated them as equals. We never respected their way of doing things. Now they're leaving, and I fear we'll regret it." Another log from a military commander was even more direct. Humanity scared us, not because they were strong, but because they were unpredictable. They didn't follow our models of behavior. They succeeded where our logic said they should fail, and worst of all, they made us question our own superiority. We told ourselves we were pushing them away for good reasons. But the truth? We were afraid of what they represented: change, chaos, a universe that didn't follow our neat rules. Kasala sat back, processing everything she had learned. The picture was clear now. Humans weren't the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but they had something unique. They adapted faster than any other species. They refused to accept defeat. They formed bonds across species lines, and they were willing to do whatever was necessary to protect those they cared about. Dr. Kasala, Paran said quietly, "If we find them, will they help us?" She thought about the question. 300 years was a long time. Humanity might have changed completely. They might be more advanced now, or they might have fallen back to primitive ways. They might welcome the council with open arms, or they might attack on sight. But one thing seemed certain. If humans were still out there, still alive, they would remember how the council had treated them. The question wasn't whether they could help. It was whether they would want to. "I don't know," she finally answered, "but I hope they've forgiven us. Because if they haven't, we're going to have to convince them that saving the galaxy is more important than old grudges." She compiled all the relevant data into a secure file and sent it to Ambassador Thelnon. The diplomatic mission would need every piece of information available. They were going to seek help from a species that had every reason to refuse. The archives had revealed many secrets about humanity. But the most important question remained unanswered. What had humanity become in 3 centuries of isolation? The Great Council chamber of Terminus Prime was filled with noise. Representatives from 40 different species argued with each other, their voices creating a storm of sound that echoed off the metal walls. Ambassador Thelnon of the Xanthir stood at the center platform, his forearms raised high, trying to get everyone's attention. "Please, honored members, we must focus," he said, his translator converting his words into dozens of languages at once. "We have lost another system. The Kresh took the Valorian colonies at Sigma Prime yesterday. 3 billion souls gone." The chamber fell silent. 3 billion was a number too large to ignore, even for those who had become numb to the reports of destruction. The Kresh Dominion had appeared from the galactic core 6 months ago. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted beyond the obvious. They were machines, pure and simple. Giant ships that moved through space like a plague, landing on populated worlds and stripping them of all life. The organic matter was processed, converted into fuel and building materials for more Kresh ships. It was efficient, it was horrifying, and it was unstoppable. 15 battles, Commander Vrix of the Korath military spoke up, his reptilian face showing rare emotion. "We have fought them 15 times. 15 defeats. Our weapons barely scratch their shields. They adapt to every strategy we use. How do you fight an enemy that learns from every mistake?" Thelnon looked around the chamber. He saw fear in every face. Regardless of how many eyes or tentacles or sensory organs each species possessed, the Galactic Council had stood for 2,000 years, surviving wars, plagues, and political upheavals. But nothing like this. The Kresh were different. They didn't want territory or resources or political power. They wanted everything, and they took it with cold mechanical precision. "There might be one option," a voice said from the back. It was Elder Archon Vrax, the oldest member of the Council. His species, the Eternals, lived for centuries. Vrax himself was over 400 years old. "But many of you will not like it." "Speak, Elder," Thelanon said. "We are beyond the luxury of pride." Vrax moved to the center of the chamber, his movements slow but deliberate. He carried a small data device in his aged hands. 300 years ago, there was a species that fought in ways we did not understand. They won battles they should have lost. They survived situations that should have killed them. They scared us, if we are being honest. "You speak of the humans," Thelnon said quietly. The chamber erupted again. Some representatives laughed. Others looked confused. The younger members had never even heard of humans. They were stories, myths told to cadets in military academies about the dangers of underestimating primitive species. "The humans are gone," someone shouted. "They disappeared 300 years ago. They're probably extinct, or they're hiding," another voice added. "They were dangerous, unstable. My grandfather told me stories about human soldiers. They didn't fight with honor. They used tricks and traps and refused to surrender even when beaten. Vrax activated his data device. A hologram appeared above the chamber floor, showing a battle scene from centuries past. The image quality was poor by modern standards, but the content was clear enough. Ships were fighting in the darkness of space. Council vessels, marked with the old Alliance symbols, were being pushed back by an unknown enemy fleet. Then new ships arrived. They were smaller than the Council vessels, with strange designs that seemed more functional than beautiful. "This is the Battle of Broken Gate," Vrax explained. 307 years ago, the Council was at war with the hegemony of the Outer Rim. We were losing. Then the humans arrived. The hologram showed human ships moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. They ignored damage to their own vessels, focused fire on seemingly random targets, and broke every rule of proper fleet engagement. But somehow it worked. The enemy fleet began to fall apart, unable to predict what the humans would do next. "They fought for 6 days," Vrax continued. "They lost half their fleet. But they held the gate long enough for the peace treaty to be signed. After that battle, humanity withdrew from galactic affairs. They sealed their borders, refused all communication, and vanished." Thelnon had heard the stories, of course. Every council member learned about the humans in their history lessons. But seeing the actual footage was different. The human ships looked so fragile compared to modern vessels, yet they had fought with such intensity. "Why did they leave?" a young Valorian diplomat asked. "Because we asked them to fight our wars, then condemned them for how they won," Vrax said simply. "We called them brutal, uncivilized. We said they couldn't be trusted because they didn't follow the proper rules of engagement." Admiral Chen of the Terran Federation sent one final message to this council before closing Earth's borders. "I have it here." The hologram changed, showing a human female in military uniform. She looked tired, with lines on her face that suggested many years of stress, but her eyes were hard and determined. "We came to the stars seeking friendship," the Admiral said, her voice clear despite the age of the recording. "We found fear instead. You asked us to fight your wars, then condemned us for how we won them. You called us monsters for doing what was necessary to survive. We're going home. Don't come looking for us. This is goodbye." The recording ended. The chamber was quiet again. "That was 300 years ago," Thelnon said. "Even if they're still alive, why would they help us now?" "We treated them terribly." "Because the alternative is extinction," Vrax replied. "Not just for us. For everyone. The Kresh don't care about politics or history. They will consume every organic world they find, including Earth if they reach it. And there's another reason." He paused, looking around the chamber. Humans were strange creatures. They formed bonds with other species easily. Too easily, some said. They had a saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." If we approach them correctly, explain the situation, they might help. Not for us, but for the innocent billions who will die if the Kresh continue. Commander Vrick stood up. "This is insane. We're going to seek help from myths and legends? What if we find their worlds empty? What if they attack us on sight? What if they're right to refuse? Then we will have tried everything," Thelnon said quietly. He had made his decision. "Elder Vrax is right. We have no other options. I propose we send a diplomatic mission to human space. A small ship, representatives from multiple species with a message of desperate need. The vote was close, but it passed. They would seek the humans. They would go to the Sol system to Earth and beg for help from the species they had once pushed away." As the chamber emptied, Thelnon stood alone, watching the frozen image of Admiral Chen on the hologram. 300 years was a long time. Civilizations could rise and fall in that span. Technology could advance beyond recognition. People could change or they could hold grudges. He would find out soon enough.